Welcome to the Thoughtful Leader podcast. My name is Ben Brearley. I'm a leadership coach and the founder of Thoughtful Leader. The Thoughtful Leader podcast is all about short, sharp leadership advice because thoughtful leadership is good leadership.
Welcome to episode 293 of the Thoughtful Leader podcast. In this episode, we're going to talk about doing the groundwork with your key stakeholders, the people around you, because there's really no quick fixes to building leadership credibility. So we're going to talk about this today and how I got onto this topic as well. So let's get into this episode right now. Now, it might sound like I've got a cold. I don't actually have a cold. We've just been having a lot of work done in our house this week and there was a lot of dust flying around. So I've got some serious hay fever going on. But the show must continue. So in this episode, we're talking about groundwork. And this came up because I was actually on a podcast interview, being interviewed for a podcast, and we're talking about quiet leadership and, people interrupting you and having to talk over people in meetings and all these sorts of things. And the host was talking a lot about silence. Like, how can we use silence effectively to get people to listen? And I thought, well, silence is an effective technique because, if you're silent and people respect you and you have credibility, then people will pause and want to hear what you have to say. But if you're a quiet leader, like a thoughtful leader in a meeting with lots of people talking loudly and everyone's speaking across each other, being silent isn't really going to do anything unless you've got a heap of respect in that room. So I feel like we're all looking for, not all of us, but I feel like a lot of people are looking for tips and tricks and, if I'm quiet, how can I get people to listen to me? Well, here's a tip for you. You can just shout louder and overwhelm everyone in the room and they'll listen to you, but it may not be the best strategy. So the bad news is this is not a quick fix. There are no magical techniques to make everyone listen to you in meetings or at work. The best tool is really credibility and having people respect what you bring, no matter what style you bring. So there's no quick fixes here. And that's why this episode's all about laying the groundwork. And by groundwork, I mean, you're going to do the preparation and you're going to build the foundations to be able to have positive interactions with the people in your workplace, rather than relying on some sort of influencing techniques. So that's what this episode's all about. And the first question I want to ask you in this topic is, who are your key stakeholders? So you might think about people that are influential in your workplace and that you have to deal with quite often. You might also think about people that have a keen interest in the work that you do. So the ones that are interested and influential are often your most important stakeholders that you really have to manage well. And these are people like your own manager, maybe people in the executive team who have a real stake in what you're doing or care about what you're doing. And then there's other people that are supportive of you but don't rely on you. So they could be your peers. Your team members are obviously important stakeholders for you as well. But you might have an important supplier who supplies things to your team that you need to rely on. And that could be an important stakeholder as well. So they might not be that interested in the work that you do, but they're quite influential because they have the ability to withhold something. So if they don't supply what you need in time, for example, then that might be a key stakeholder for you as well. So you can map out your key stakeholders, and one way to do this is using those two criteria that I just spoke about, which was influence and interest. So you can do a little 2x2 grid where you go low interest, high interest, and low influence and high influence. And what that can give you is the top right quadrant is going to be your high interest and high influence stakeholders. And they're the ones you really want to nurture. You really want to build strong relationships with them. And the ones that are high interest but low influence, those ones you still want to keep happy, but you don't have to spend too much time making sure that they're okay. Then there's ones that are highly influential, but maybe not that invested in the work that you do in the team or interested. And therefore, you may still want to keep them satisfied, but you don't necessarily have to engage them as strongly because they're not as interested in what you do. Then you have the low interest and low influence stakeholders, and these ones are the ones you can maybe not pay so much attention to. Now, it's important to note as well that if you're talking about a workplace situation where you want to be heard in meetings and you want people to respect you, you're going to look at those relationships as well. So if you've got a dominant manager in another team who is always overriding you, or basically he or she is very loud and opinionated, then you might find you have to build those relationships so that you can essentially build the respect, and therefore they're going to listen to what you have to say. Now, one way I like to think about the relationships is using the concept of rapport, or a relationship bank account. So this is all about putting money in the bank. So if you've got a positive bank balance with this person, let's say, then you have a positive relationship. You generally get on well. You can easily resolve conflicts. It's an easy person to talk to, all those sorts of good things. So that's a positive bank balance with that stakeholder. Now, sometimes though, you will have to make a withdrawal from that bank account. So there's some examples I use, such as if you have to ask someone for a favor, then you might be making a withdrawal from that bank account. If you have to disagree with someone, you might have to withdraw from that bank account. If you have to challenge their opinion or push back on them or say no to them, then you are making a withdrawal from that bank account. So what can happen is, if you don't have enough money in that relationship bank, then you go into negative. And what do you think is going to happen there? Well, the answer is probably nothing good will happen here. Often, those stakeholders who you have a negative account with will probably push back on you, and they won't tolerate you disagreeing with them or negotiating with them, for example. So you want to put money into the relationship bank account. And how do we do that? Well, the first thing is doing good work. So you appear like a credible person. That's a good start. The next thing you can do is to help that person out. So you might do them a favor, take some pressure off them, offer to do something that's not required, but you're doing them an act of goodwill, for example. You can build that credibility, build that relationship bank account over time. Even just building connection with them as well is a good step. So finding more about them, maybe they talk about their family, you ask about how their kids are doing, whatever it is, whatever you need to do to build that connection and common ground goes a long way to putting money in that bank account. So you want to have enough money in the bank to be able to disagree with someone or speak over them or say no to them or maybe negotiate something with them without going into the negative bank balance. So that's the idea here. How much groundwork have you done to build that relationship before you need to use that bank account, those dollars in the bank? So let's say your boss is a key stakeholder. If you have a great relationship with your boss and you negotiate your workload because maybe they're putting too much on you, there's a better chance that they're going to tolerate that and be amenable to adjusting your workload. However, if you have a bad relationship with your boss and maybe they don't think you're doing a good job or whatever it is, then you might go into the negative bank balance there, and they're likely to say, no, you just do the work I give you. There's no negotiation here. So often the time when this is the hardest to do is often when you go to a new workplace or you start a new job or you're dealing with someone new who you don't know. You've actually got zero bank account with that person. You've got zero balance in the bank. And that's not because you've done anything bad. It's just because you're starting from zero. So it's important to think about, okay, well, who are my key stakeholders and how much balance do I have in my bank account with them? And I think it's a good place to start. Of course, when you start a new job or you change teams or you're dealing with new people, it's going to be the hardest because you're going to have to work to build money in the bank account, and it's harder to push back and say no and do all those things without a balance. So this is what I mean by doing the groundwork. And if you're in a meeting, for example, and you want to get the attention of the room, the groundwork and the relationships that you have with people in the room are going to be very important to having that happen. So going back to what I mentioned earlier, like, oh, how can you use silence? I mean, that's a gimmick, right? That is a gimmick. Well, I'm going to use this influential technique where I'm silent and then people will wait for me to speak. That only happens when you have a positive relationship bank account and you're credible and people really are interested in what you have to say, because either you have a lot of knowledge or you have a lot of influence or goodwill in the room. Otherwise, it won't work. So these are the things I reckon is important about building the groundwork. If you want to influence people at work, if you want to have a better time in your workplace and actually, have less conflict or better ability to resolve conflict constructively, then it's all about doing the groundwork, building the groundwork in the relationships with your team and with other key stakeholders. So just to recap here, I'd say number one is map out your key stakeholders. Who are the ones in that top right box who are highly influential and highly interested in what you do? Who else is around as well? Who's highly influential but not invested in what you do? They can be good people to build relationships with as well, because they can influence others. And you might think about, well, who is really interested in what you're doing but not that influential? And they can be somewhat your cheerleaders, right? They can help spread goodwill as well. So we don't want to forget about those. So you can map your stakeholders into these key categories. Think about, okay, who am I building relationships with? And how much money have I got in the bank? And obviously in real life, we don't know how much money we have in the bank. We just have to gauge it by a bit of an estimate. But it's a good way of thinking about how strong your relationships are with your stakeholders. Because in that example I talked about before, when maybe people are interrupting you or you're not the loudest person in the room and you want people to listen, well, to get that to happen, most of the work happens outside of the room. It's about building the relationship so that people respect you and believe you have credibility. So hopefully this episode was interesting and useful for you as a way of thinking about your key stakeholders. And thank you very much for listening. If you have a few seconds, I'd love it if you could leave a positive review on your app of choice. Give me a 5-star would be great. And if you'd like some support, building relationships with your stakeholders, mapping them out, working out how to be more influential in your workplace, one-to-one coaching with me is always an option as well, and that can really help. So if you are interested in that, get in touch. You can go to my leadership coaching page, which will be on the show notes page as a link. The show notes page for this episode is thoughtfulleader.com/podcast/293. Okay, thank you once again for listening, and I'll be back next week.